I have an issue. I mean, I'm all for 9 like-minded people living together, whether or not they're related. I'm all for 9 people that totally disagree on every single thing in the world living together, regardless of not whether they're related. The issue that I have a problem is, first, we're saying that these issues shall be considered. So are we requiring the following criteria or not?
Yes.
So it says we're going to consider, for instance, whether the members of the household have adopted a set of rules covering democratic governance. What does that mean?
For us, we would ask that they have that. If they've had that information, we would ask them to provide it. That, again, that would be as part of the application process. We want to make sure that they at least have these things in place.
So what would it say? And what it would, I mean, they have like a charter, like a constitution of the premises?
Yes, and you know, they have a set of rules, guidelines, how they split money, those type of things. We've never seen one before, so it's kind of, for me, hard to say exactly what it would look like or what would be acceptable.
I have seen these things before, and it's a summer camp, you know, and it's you got a chore wheel, and you know, Janet does the sweeping on Monday, and Frank does the sweeping on Tuesday, but so are we going to enforce to make sure that these constitutions of the communities are enforced?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Frey, we're going to look to see that they're in place. It's not something that we're going to regularly go out and look to see that, you know, every day that they're abiding by their constitution or their rules. We just want to make sure that an initial set of rules has come forth with the application.
So, I mean, what happens if the constitution that they've set up is not really a democratic process at all? What happens if all of the power is given to one particular individual that happens to be a little bit off the rocker? What happens if the people that are supposed to be buying the milk this week didn't, and someone's calling in and saying, hey, Otis didn't buy the milk this week? What are we going to do about that? Are we going to do anything?
My take on that, ultimately, first, it would be a civil issue among the parties. But if, you know, we had some type of ruling or something that said that they're no longer abiding by it, we do have the ability in this ordinance to take away that intentional communities designation.
So I would agree with you, it would be a civil issue unless we put into place in an ordinance. And if it's in place in ordinance, then the individual that was supposed to be the recipient of the milk on that particular week could call in and complain and saying that they're violating the Constitution. It doesn't make any sense, and we should take away the license. And are we going to take away the license because of that?
I would hope not.
So, I mean, here's my point. My point is that I'm all for intentional communities. I'm all for the increased density. I'm all for the occupancy levels being upped, assuming that there's adequate bedrooms and lighting and windows and everything else that you need in order to have habitable conditions. My issue is that if you go through every single one of these issues, we're not going to be enforcing this stuff. Let's just be honest. We're not going to be enforcing this stuff, so let's be honest about what we're actually doing, which I'm for, which is increasing the allowances for density.
I am one of the co-authors of this, and so I'll just explain to you as I understand it. There are groups of people living together who are like-minded. I would perhaps describe it like a kibbutz, or like a way that people have lived together that are not related by blood. That seems to be the big issue here with regard to our current code, is that you can have four people living together if they're related by blood in a house, but if they're not related by blood, you can't, which is a little kooky to me, because you could have 2 parents with 4 kids and they each have 2 kids and they have 16 cars and we don't care. But if it's 4 unrelated people with 5 others with 2 kids with 16 cars, we're really interested. And so I think this is kind of a way, all of these rules and regulations that they might consider are a way to determine whether or not these folks are living together collectively or not. It's not really a way to have us be the police of who picks up milk, as much as a way for us to determine if they see themselves as a group, because we're giving them special dispensation to go around occupancy under the zoning code within the building code. And so Mr. Rumpy has assured Councilmember Gordon and I, as I understand it, that we're not going to have 6 people living in the dining room as their bedroom. Mm-hmm. But there could be 2 people in a bedroom, or 2 people in each of 4 bedrooms. And that goes around the zoning requirements. So that's why there's a list of things. I don't think the list of things is really much other than a way to define what people who are collectively living together, how they see themselves. And perhaps you have a whole other list of questions, so I'll let you do that. And perhaps Councilmember Gordon, I'm not an expert on folks who are living together in intentional communities. I jumped into this mainly because I want to see people living together not defined by blood, and let people associate the way they want to associate with each other, as long as they meet the building code requirements for occupancy.
Madam Chair, so the last part of what you said, I agree with 100%, allowing people who are not related by blood to live together so long as they meet certain occupancy requirements, whatever those occupancy requirements are that we set up. What I don't get is setting up this massive framework to leap around what I believe we should have the guts to do anyway.
Well, this ordinance does not eliminate occupancy, and that's not the conversation that Councilmember Gordon and his office has had with neighborhoods as
I
they've been
understand
out
that.
there. So I think that they were thinking of this as a first step towards taking a use that was already in place and, making it, for lack of a better word, kosher or allowed, and then trying to determine out what the next steps would be. But I'm not the intentional communities expert, so perhaps Councilmember Gordon can speak to that.
I yield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. I also appreciate the questions. I think the intention behind C and actually D was to help us get a better common understanding of what an intentional community is. I don't think it's massive requirements. I think these are some general guidelines of what we're going to take into consideration, what a household should take into consideration if they're going to register. And this is it's more of a self-identifying registration process. And so if you fit generally the categories outlined in section C, and if you're not doing those things that are outlined in section D, then coming forward with your registration makes sense. It's a little bit like the domestic partnership registration that we already have on the books. We allow people to self-identify themselves as domestic partners. They fill out a registration form and they give it to the clerk. Once you've done that, you are now considered, in all intents and purposes, a functional family, and you're not subject to the same over-occupancy rules that you would be if you're unrelated. Minneapolis did that years ago. It made a lot more sense when same-sex marriage was against the law, but some people are still identifying that way. Even different sex couples decide they're going to register so that they're, feel comfortable about living in their household. That's more what this is. It also then gives us a tool later, because you fill out your registration, you get it notarized saying we're an intentional community, here's kind of our guidelines and our rules. And I'll just note, if you're a cooperative, and many of these will be, then you're basically going to have everything written out ahead of time, and you just refer to your cooperative rules that you already have in place, and makes it easy. But then this will be in place, and it will give us something to go back to if suddenly there's questions that are raised where somebody who lives in the household says, hey, we're not really operating like this at all. We can look at the guidelines and the registration that they said they were doing and check on them. But it's more of a self-identified commitment that they're making. Then we can review what they say they're going to do and say you qualify as a intentional community, and then you can move forward with the next step. So that's kind of the intention.
Councilmember Frey.
What was the term again before we had marriage equality? I literally forget.
Domestic
the term. It was
partnership.
domestic partnership.
Partnership. It's still on the books.
So the domestic partnership at the time I think made pretty good sense. But the reason we implemented domestic partnership is at the time collectively we didn't have the guts to say we need to have full marriage equality. And I think this is kind of the same situation here. I think that we need to just quite simply take the next step, because if at the end of the day we are going to be adjudicating some of these intra-housing disagreements, I think we're getting ourselves into problems that we don't want to be inserting ourselves. I mean, because at the end, you did say at the end that the purpose of this is to be able to, if somebody comes to us and says, hey, you're not really operating as an intentional community, maybe they're an unintentional community, maybe they just haven't quite met all these criteria. I think a lot of these issues are going to be brought by someone who's either living in the house or was recently living in the house and for some reason got the boot. And then we're going to need to go in and determine, we're going to need to go sort through their dirty laundry. I think it's a bad idea. I think the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm kind of talking this through in my head. It's a bad idea. And again, I'm all for increasing the occupancy requirement, or I'm sorry, allowing for these individuals to live collectively together.
So Councilmember Frey, in the, I don't know, year that this has been going on, we have looked at the issue of eliminating the occupancy requirement, but there's just not a lot of enthusiasm for a variety of reasons to go there. Some of it has to do with the fear of rooming houses or boarding houses. Some of it has to do with over-occupancy near colleges and universities. So even in the community meetings, there wasn't a real sense that we should just be eliminating occupancy requirements. And so I think what Councilmember Gordon is trying to do is take a group of people who are self-identified as groups of people living together and get them out of the potential crosshairs of the government coming in and telling them they can't live together. It's innocuous, right? I mean, there's how many groups are actually going to fall under this category? It's just trying to make their living situation legal as long as it meets the building code requirements. There could be a larger conversation about occupancy, but you will find, as Councilmember Gordon might tell you, that there isn't a lot of support at this point right now to just lift the occupancy limit, because people who already have problems with rental housing potentially could have more problems, and we already have so many problems and not enough staff to deal with it, for example, on the north side. I think Councilmember Gordon thought about bringing this up years and years ago, and there wasn't even support at that time. So things do change over time. I don't know that we're ready to just eliminate the occupancy requirement, so I believe Councilmember Gordon brought this forward as a way to solve this narrow problem. And I suppose if we put it in place and we get problems from that, then Councilmember Gordon will need to adjust based on that. That's why I see it as kind of a no-brainer. Doesn't make sense to me why we wouldn't just do this. Not having it, that's like saying we should raise the minimum wage to $20 an hour. That's the ideal. 15 might do, but 20 is the ideal. So let's don't raise it at all because we can't get to 20. This is actually a pretty good thing.
No,
That's why I put my name on it.
I appreciate the analogy. I think it's dramatically different. This is not a matter of simply getting rid of the occupancy requirements or maximums.
Yes, it is.
I'm saying it could be a matter of raising the occupancy requirements, and for the inspectors to, at the very beginning, just like you're anticipating and planning on doing, you go into the home, you figure out what are the number of windows, what is the square footage, what is the maximum occupancy that this particular house can handle, and we're going to be doing that with this intentional communities ordinance, and I fully support that. It's a good idea. And that particular occupancy could be greater than the occupancy would otherwise be allowed. Now, I support that piece. The piece that I don't get is the democratic governance, the sharing maintenance responsibility and other household items, the making sure that everybody's got a voter registration and a driver's license for this particular home, the filing of receipt and tax documents. It's sharing expenses for food. Why does it make it a better household if people are sharing expenses for food than if they're not and the same number of people are living there?
So perhaps there's a public hearing, and perhaps there are
Maybe I'll
people
get some
here who
good
want to
arguments. Sorry.
address that issue. I will say in the, years past, like 50 years ago, in neighborhoods like the one I represent, there were homes with 8 bedrooms, and landlords came in and turned them into rooming houses, and each of the 8 bedrooms had 2 people living in them. And so in an R1 district, a single family district, 16 people were living in one house. They had no commonality with each other. And I think people felt that that helped deteriorate the quality of a neighborhood because it was a very, very high occupancy. So they reacted by throwing it in the opposite direction, by saying, okay, you can't have more than 3 unrelated or 4 unrelated people. And now we're talking about moving somewhere in the middle, but this ordinance is probably a first step towards that. I think if you went out to neighborhoods, even neighborhoods that don't have big, huge houses, you'd have an outcry of people in R1 neighborhoods saying, just let, 8 people live in 4 bedrooms, or they might be upset about that. Who knows? We didn't go out and ask that question. The question was asked with regard to intentional communities. Councilmember Frey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So every single one of the benefits that the individuals that spoke have extolled are accurate, I agree with, and can be accomplished by increasing the occupancy limits to allow the intentional communities to exist. When we talk about affordable housing, this accomplishes it. When we talk about allowing intentional communities that are pre-existing to continue, this accomplishes it. When we talk about intentional communities' ability to expand, that accomplishes it as well. I was actually over, I'm sorry, ma'am, I forgot your name. Charlotte. I was actually over at your house a few years ago, 3 or 4 years. I had a ball. And I would strongly encourage you to open another one. I think it's a spectacular setup there. I'm for it. I just don't agree that this is the way to allow you to do it. I want you to be able to practice what you're doing now. I think it works. I think it's an excellent way to build community, to help for affordable housing. You name it. I believe in the communal experience. I just believe in the communal experience without a substantial amount of government interference. And I feel like items 1 through 5 especially, and I have a question about D1, but specifically C1 through 5, if we're not going to get involved in these areas, and it sounds like we're not, let's not have them in the ordinance. You know, you just testified a second ago that, well, these things are going to be considered, but let's be honest, we really don't want to insist, we don't want to enforce the fact that this individual is registered to vote at this particular location. And we don't want to enforce the matter that this particular individual has a license, a driver's license that says this particular address. If we're not going to do it, let's not put it in the ordinance. I feel strongly about
Frey,
this.
I'm going to move approval. So if
Okay.
you do not want me to move approval and you want to postpone this to continue to work on it, Councilmember Gordon and I have worked on it to death. You can do that. I'm not going to amend it on the floor. We're not going to change occupancy here today or in the next cycle.
Well,
And I actually think I, as one of the co-authors, basically required us to go out and have some large public hearings and encourage people to come. And the reason there wasn't a lot of objection is because it was written the way it was. So any changes you make, I likely would not agree to, because I don't think that holds faith with the communities that we asked to come together. Those are just things you want. And so I think it's important that we get something through for the people who have been living under this cloud, where we can make what they're doing legal, take a look at how it works for a year, and then make changes if need be. That would be how I would look at it. If you want to do something different, let me know what you want to do differently, and we can vote on that.
Well, Madam Chair, what I would prefer to do is amend on the floor, but since that's not something you're looking for, I'm perfectly happy to go back and do the work necessary. I think items 1 through 5 should be eliminated, and that's what I would amend to do. So I would move to, I'm not moving, but what I would like to do is move to eliminate items 1 through 5, and I actually have a question about D1.
Well, I mean, we can sit here till 5 o'clock at night looking at this. We have 6 more items on the agenda, including 3 public hearing items, of which most people seem comfortable with this except for you. So if you want to amend this, then you should either move it forward without recommendation or postpone it a cycle to work with Councilmember Gordon's office on some of these issues.
I'm gonna move it forward without recommendation. I will move. You've already got a motion on the floor.
Nope, I said I would defer.
Okay, so I will move this without recommendation, with the hope of amending specifically items C1 through 5 and D1.
Councilmember Gordon, can you speak to whether or not there'd be any willingness to do that? Because if not, we might as well pass it as it is today.
So I couldn't quite hear your specific question, Madam Chair.
Councilmember Frey would like to,
Would you be supportive of this,
wants to support gutting the language C1 through 5.
to get rid of it?
No. And if I could speak to that?
Please.
I think that we're ready to move forward on this. I just have to say that this is something that I've been looking at since 2008. And we went through a 2-year process. Every little piece that's in this ordinance is something that was kind of negotiated with the community. I know from a conceptual point, and I share that conceptual point, if it's a safe house for your cousin or your grandmother or your wife, it should be safe for your friend. But we have some very big houses in the city. We looked at that option. We actually measured houses in Southeast Como in the University neighborhood. We said for this house, if we just simply said we're going to go all on the housing maintenance code, people were saying 15, 20, 30 people allowed in the houses, very concerned about landlords and what they do with those, all of those issues. It took us a long time to kind of come to this spot right now where I don't have the opposition of a single neighborhood association in the city of Minneapolis. And I could easily have written an ordinance or just lifted the occupancy and we'd have the room packed with people worried about it. You're probably right. I'm probably right. It's probably we're over concerned about our zoning code and the occupancy limits. But I don't think the city of Minneapolis is ready. I'm not sure that we'd get a majority of votes for that anyway. And I don't know if it's smart to do it right away because we could end up having such a big backlash, we'd end up never getting intentional communities like this set up so that we could actually address some of these serious concerns that are going on right now that we've heard about. This is also something that's called out specifically in our plan for aging in place. The term intentional communities came up in their plan, and they want to do this. So did accessory dwelling units. And accessory dwelling units is getting at this from a little different side. So this is intentional communities. And it's another piece of that. This would be a good, actually, I think if you want to just 5 years or down the road, whatever, look at opening it wide open. For those of you who might want to do that, and I'm not, for my constituents back in the second ward who are concerned about that, that's not my secret master plan, but it might be a good test for us to say, can these intentional communities work with these guidelines and regulations? And if they are, maybe we'll say, now's the time to take away some guidelines or regulations. We actually got a lot of pressure from a lot of different directions. A lot of people are still concerned about just letting one rental property do this. We heard from people who said, just do it like the accessory dwelling units where you have to be owner occupied. But we also heard from a lot of people who want to do it. There's no way they could afford a house, but they want an opportunity to do this. So we hammered out that compromise. Well, what if it's just one rental property owner that can do this? I mean, one property that a landlord might own as their rental property in their portfolio can do this, and also that they have to be in the proper tier where they're good performing according to our standards. So I just want to encourage the committee, and thanks for giving me all this time, and I could probably talk more about it because there's other issues that this gets at. I guess I just want to hit the one last one that's come up a couple times. We have seen house after house in the area also get chopped up, and the integrity of our historic homes is being destroyed because people are putting in kitchens and making duplexes and triplexes where they probably don't necessarily belong, and they don't even want them. And I think this is a way to get at that too. But I think it makes total sense for us to move forward with this thoughtful approach, this compromise, and see how it works. So I'm hoping that we won't end up postponing it.
Councilmember Frey, followed by Councilmember Ike.
So, what I see here is that we're getting residents of the city of Minneapolis comfortable with an ordinance by including regulations that we've explicitly said we're not going to enforce. So the way I see it is it's in name only. We've said we're only going to be, this is what it says in the ordinance itself. It says that shall be considered in determining whether a group operates as intentional community includes, and then it lists stuff. So we're going to consider whether to have these things. We might not. Hopefully we wouldn't be enforcing these things. Maybe we would. Laws matter and words matter, and we should be clear about this. So I 100% support the goal. The mechanism in getting to that goal, I don't think is clear. I think it's ambiguous, and it's not entirely honest, especially if we're not going to be enforcing these pieces. And with regard to old historic homes being cut up, items 1 through 5 have nothing to do with that.
So Councilmember Frey, do you want to make a motion to eliminate those?
I do.
We'll vote on that, and then we can move forward. Go ahead.
I move to amend the ordinance to eliminate items 1 through 5, and then I'll have questions about D1 for later.
Okay, on Councilmember Frey's motion to eliminate items 1 through 5, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. That fails. Next.
I have a question about item D1.
Okay, maybe we'll, why
No,
don't
you
you
know,
ask the
in
question?
the
I'm not
interest
sure.
in the interest of respecting everybody's time, I'm gonna I'll ask staff offline.
Let's see, I can't, which section is that? I'm sorry, I can't find. Oh, D, okay.
D1. It's fine. I can ask staff
Prohibiting them
offline.
to be a rooming house.
Yeah, you might want to ask it because I think Councilmember Gordon knows the answer.
It says a dwelling unit in which the various occupants act as separate roomers may not be deemed to be occupied as an intentional community. The question is, what does acting as separate roomers mean?
Councilmember Gordon.
Well, and I think that our reg services folks are well aware of that, is that when everybody has a separate lease, they pay their rent separately, they come in and they go as individuals. It's essentially a rooming house.
It's not an intentional community because they're not working collectively on ownership or taxes or any of those things. That is by definition a rooming house. That's what we're trying to avoid. Okay, so,
I have no amendment then.
okay. I'm going to move approval of the item number 17 in its entirety with the staff recommendation. Are there further comments or questions? Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be brief. Obviously, I know this was a lot of work in the making. I've already been sort of outed in terms of my initial intentions about expanding the cooperative enterprises in the community. Obviously, this is a kind of a compromise step. I think Charlotte's commentary about this being a gateway or a stepping stone to that. Obviously, down the road, I'm going to probably press to maybe make the that intention in the intentional communities ordinance more explicit. Through mechanisms of partnerships with our cooperative networks out there. I think to be helpful in that intention is to get to that end more swiftly, if not more fully. I think because this is a public hearing, I think all statements are public domain. So if there's anyone forming a band out there that wants a cool name, Nebulous Collective Structures, I think is a great candidate for that. So that's out there for public consumption. And so with that, I think, the way I looked at this when I was having conversations in my backyard, if I had my druthers, we would be expanding the cooperative framework even more aggressively. However, I do believe in this stepping stone thing. I think we can maybe refine that moving forward after we kind of cast this out for a year or two. Also, there's the downside. There's the fear. People, so you regulate things because not when they go right, or you have this great sort of vision of how we're going to utopically become the super cooperative city of Minneapolis. What happens when they go wrong? What happens when it's, for lack of a better term, a flop house, when people are flouting rules, or this is a great loophole to create all kinds of inappropriate living situations or negatively impactful situations for the broader neighborhood or that block. A lot of times rules are about what can go wrong. I think we have a lot of little tripwires in here for when things do go wrong. I would be very surprised that we wouldn't pursue things if there's a complaint. We often are pretty reactive to a complaint given system. And I imagine department would absolutely be looking to see that all the T's are crossed and the I's dotted. And if there are flouters, I'm assuming that flouters don't always follow the rules well, and we'd have them. And I would like to have those tripwires for those who are seeing this as a loophole and not an opportunity. So is it perfect? That's for time to tell. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Further comments or questions? Seeing none on the motion to approve as originally submitted, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item is approved. We're